As you know, DSLR cameras have been used for video production for a number of years. And kind of a new trend we're seeing is with the release of mirrorless full frame and similar frame sizes, that we're starting to see mirrorless cameras for video production. So what we've done is we've invited speakers from most of the major manufacturers to come out and just tell us a little bit about how some of their new products can be used for video production. And what we really want to hear is kind of the technologies behind it. So we're going to have a total of 6 speakers, and they're each going to do about a 15-minute presentation. And then at the end of that, we're going to have everybody come up to the table, and we can kind of throw it out to the crowd for questions. So I, first of all, want to thank all of our presenters. Many of them were busy setting up at the Profusion show down at the conference center today and kind of raced over here. So we're grateful for that. We have done the meeting at Profusion in the past, but we just thought for tonight it was a little more conducive in this particular venue, and the timing worked out better than it would at Profusion this year. But I certainly invite you, if you guys want to see some of the products, Profusion is on for the next 2 days, and encourage you to go down there and see that. So we were going to do this alphabetically by company, but we're actually going to skip down to Canon first. And Luke is here. He's an associate solutions specialist, and he's going to talk about Canon and some of their mirrorless products.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Luke. I obviously work for Canon at our headquarters up in Brampton. I deal largely with video products, and while we're here today to talk about mirrorless products specifically, I'm going to kick off not only my presentation, but apparently the whole evening in probably the stupidest way possible by talking about the opposite of mirrorless for just a second. I'm going to be talking about DSLR. That might sound a little weird, but it should hopefully make sense as I go along, so bear with me. So I'm going to start off by talking about this camera right here. This is the 5D Mark II. This was released over 10 years ago. And it kicked off what we call the DSLR revolution. So, maybe a dated term today. But the reason I bring this up is because this was sort of when the time period started, when people started using cameras of this form factor for professional video acquisition. And I really do mean that. Back in the day, the 5D Mark II was used, that's a BTS shot of it on the set of House, filming an episode of that. It was used in Saturday Night Live, everything that you would expect, documentaries, music videos. And today, these cameras are still often used for those applications. The last round of Oscars, 5D variants were responsible for shooting 2 Oscar-nominated documentaries. So what does this have to do with mirrorless? Whoops. I think it's important to make the distinction between DSLR, which a lot of us are familiar with, and sort of the emerging technology of mirrorless. Really, what are we talking about specifically when we're talking about video? What separates these two things? If you think about it, both these platforms can use the same sensors, the same processors, have the same codecs, and have the same output. So really, what are we talking about when we talk about mirrorless? I think is a very important discussion to have. So when we remove the mirror from the camera, there's a few topics that tend to come up, optical viewfinder versus electronic viewfinder. I tend to prefer an EVF, but I'm going to kind of gloss over that because I find for video acquisition, it's kind of moot point in cameras of this form factor. I don't know a lot of video shooters who shoot like a photographer like this. Maybe some people in the crowd, I don't mean to offend you, but I just haven't met anyone like that yet. Size and weight is often brought up as sort of a benefit to mirrorless as well. Maybe in some cases that can be an advantage, but it's something else that I find kind of minor in the grand scheme of things. Where I do really want to focus is the lens mount. So as the flange distance changes, you get rid of that mirror, you can design a whole new lens mount, and a lot of opportunities exist when you start looking at things from that. And that's really where I want to focus when talking about mirrorless, because that is really the core of mirrorless in general. For all the cameras that we're going to be releasing for full frame, they all follow this one route, and everything spawns from that. So it can have a lot of surprising side effects. So just to compare, this is our EF mount, that's our DSLR full frame mount, and over there is our RF mount, that's our full frame mirrorless mount. The EF mount came out in 1987, so over 30 years ago, and in that time we've produced over 100 million EF lenses for this mount. It's been hugely successful for us and a lot of other companies that have used it as well for both lenses and cameras. The RF, by comparison, came out just last year, so very much in its infancy by comparison. Both share the same lens diameter, 54 millimeters. So I guess we got it right on the first time, no need to change that. The flange distance is the really important thing though. So of course with a mirror system, you're going to need a flange distance. Ours was 44 millimeters from the back of the lens to the sensor. And that's a very, very important distance to keep constant in all the cameras that have ever had this mount. Whereas, we've shrunk that by over half when we got mirrorless. Of course, knocking that mirror out of the equation changed things drastically. Another key difference here that's easy to overlook, that is so easy to overlook I forgot to write it down, is the pin communication system. We've expanded from 8 to 12 pins, and that also has perhaps more of an effect than you might think. So this is what I'm kind of talking about. When we're talking about mirrorless cameras, we also have to talk about mirrorless lenses. The whole system changes from front to back. And this is how it kind of gets impacted. So I have two lenses here, both the 35 millimeter Canon primes. One is an f2 for the EF system, and on the other side we have an f1.8 for the RF system. So obviously, yeah, you can see that flange distance changing dramatically, but really I want you to focus on sort of the lens element groupings inside the camera. On the DSLR version, we have a very large lens element right at the front and a very small one in the rear, and it's almost exactly the opposite when we look at the mirrorless lens. A smaller front element and a really large back element, and that changes everything. So for mirrorless system cameras, we're able to design lenses that we've never seen before going forward. Lenses that, if we can split the load between a big front element and a larger rear element, we don't need to make such a huge front element. So we can make lenses that no DSLR system would ever be able to have. A great example of that is the RF 28-70 f2. So this is obviously kind of an appealing lens for video shooters with a constant f2 aperture throughout a standard zoom range. It's tack sharp, wide open, and all that. And it can be argued that it could replace 3 to 4 prime lenses when you're using a mirrorless camera. So already we're seeing lenses that nobody's ever designed before because of mirrorless. So it's not just about the cameras, it's about the whole system as well, and how the whole ecosystem is changing there. I want to talk quickly about some of the most popular DSLR lenses for video capture that we've produced. So we have the 16-35 series and the 24-7 series, which are really, really popular lenses for video shooting. The unfortunate thing is, though, just based on design limitations, we had to split them in two, between a constant f4 aperture and a constant f2.8 aperture. The f4 has optical image stabilization in the lens, and the f2 does not have that feature. So any image stabilization for video shooters is going to be very, very welcome. Whether it's digital, IBIS, or optical, getting rid of just even micro jitters is really, really beneficial. So that's a very popular choice. It just keeps you out of post-production if you can avoid it. Maybe you guys are better at doing it in post than I am, but I always get that sort of jello effect when I try. So having optical image stabilization, pairing that with what other sort of camera side stabilization you can is really good. And obviously f2.8, you get the shallower depth of field and all that. But we've had to keep them split until now. So because of mirrorless, we've been able to introduce these two mirrorless lenses. We've made the wide wider at 15-35, and we've kept them at a constant f2.8 aperture with image stabilization in the lenses. We would not have been able to do this without mirrorless technology. So that's very, very exciting for a lot of video shooters. Now, another thing I want to point out is those lenses have something called a control ring, which is a feature that almost all of our mirrorless lenses have on them. And what's really cool about this is that you can set this new ring to do all sorts of stuff. So any sort of exposure control, so ISO, aperture, whatever you want. And that's really, really important when we're talking about video capture in these small form factors, because when you compare it to more traditional video capture like camcorders, E&G cameras, cinema cameras, you have more real estate for physical buttons. While we're relying more and more for built-in menu systems, and they're really handy, especially with touchscreens and all that we have available to us now, nothing is really faster to use than sort of physical controls, I would argue. So any way we can give some of that back without increasing the footprint of the camera system, I think is sort of a very welcome change for video shooters. And that is all thanks to, of course, the improved pin communication system. By going from 8 to 12 pins, we're able to do cool stuff like that. And again, this is in its infancy. This is the first year. There's no telling sort of what else we'll be able to do with this new system in terms of ergonomic improvements. But the other thing I wanted to point out is it does increase the communication between the camera and the lens for increased autofocus speed, which again is really, really beneficial for video shooters. We do have a very top-of-the-line autofocus system in our cameras, but being able to increase that speed sort of makes it more reliable on top of that. Last thing I want to talk about really quick is just lens adaptability. That's sort of a celebrated feature in mirrorless cameras. Because of that shorter flange distance, you're able to adapt a whole bunch of lenses to that system. That was a huge consideration for us. Again, we have over 100 million EF lenses made, and it's a very relevant system today still. So because of mirrorless, we were able to do sort of extra little bits in our adapters. So of course, you just have the standard adapter with pin communication. But then we have the control ring adapter, which gives more functionality. That control ring that I was talking about, you get that with EF lenses. So if you think about it, you're getting more features out of a lens because you're not using it on its native mount, which is a weird thing to think about. Adding on to that, we also have probably the most favored feature for video shooters on our mirrorless system right now, and that is the lens adapter with the drop-in filters. So you can use, a circular polarizer in there or whatever, but it also lets you use, excuse me, an ND filter, a graduated ND filter that lets you sort of, with your thumb on this dial here, right on the mount, lets you go from 1.5 to 9 stops of ND, which again is reminiscent of larger form video capture and gives you some of that control back in physical form. So very, very handy feature there for existing EF lenses. And just to sort of wrap it up, the EF lens, I don't mean to insinuate that it's dead. It has lived for 32 plus years and it's going to go for quite a bit longer. But the RF mount system, we've been able to do a lot with it in just 1 year. And it's probably going to last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It's probably going to outlive me. Every single one of our mirrorless cameras that is full frame is going to rely on this one system. So while we will have flagship cameras, new and exciting cameras that are often going to steal the limelight, I really wanted to focus on the mount because this is going to be the one constant piece of technology in our full frame mirrorless cameras going forward. All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
All right.
How's everyone doing today? All right. Thank you so much for coming out. As mentioned, I am the Senior Technical Brand Manager at Fujifilm. I get to go to Japan quite often and help develop some of this product. So what I want to show you today really is Fujifilm's development in the cinema world, right? We've been known for making incredible cine lenses, right? Fujinon lenses, the lenses that you see in broadcast or at, the Rogers Center when seeing, sports and whatnot. But I want to talk more about the digital camera side of things and kind of give you a really quick history about mirrorless. So in 2010, we launched our very first mirrorless camera in the APS-C/Super 35mm format. It was really a unique camera piece because it was a fixed lens camera, about 35 mils. But DPs, cinematographers loved it because it was such a pocketable camera that they can take with them on scouting locations so they can scout different scenes when filming. And personally, they just love the look of the image coming out of it. A lot of them kind of referred it back to the look of an Alexa, in terms of the profile. In 2012, we launched our very first interchangeable mirrorless camera. So a camera system that's able to change different lenses. We developed 3 brand new lenses for that. And we weren't still at video yet. So even in 2012, you thought about making a movie with Fujifilm, I would say no, forget about it, right? We had great colors. And some of the profiles that are built in based on some of our film heritage, like Astia, Velvia, from Great Landscape, basically profiles that are kind of ready to go, right? This is what we were known for, but in the photo side of things. So we were still kind of early for video at this point. Skipped a few years. After a bunch of development and after a bunch of technology leaps with Fujifilm, we brought in our 3rd generation technology, a brand new sensor, a brand new processor that was, at the time, revolutionary, being a dual-core processor. Our first mirrorless camera that offered 4K footage. Real 4K footage that had high bit rate, and when you went to post with it, you had latitude in terms of dynamic range to post shadows and keep highlights. And that was sort of a unique peak, a point for us where we started to say to ourselves, where could we go in cinema. So we launched the XT2. Again, we designed this mainly for photos, but because of the technology behind it, it offered quite a lot of new technology for us, and it allowed us more of a stepping stone into the cinema world. We're offering things like 422 8-bit, and for us, that was pretty impressive. I know the cinema world was already hitting 10-bit, but in a mirrorless camera in 2016, we were doing sort of almost cinematic quality out of this camera. There was very minimal crop in 4K at this time. And if you shot in full HD, there was no crop whatsoever. So you got to see exactly what, what the camera was capturing. We also started to launch a log profile called Fuji F-Log. And that allowed for more greater dynamic range, about 800% more. And it had a base ISO of 800. Compared to sort of everyone else in the mirrorless realm, they were forced to still shoot at 1600 ISO, which meant that you were using a lot of ND filters at the time, right? And so this was kind of nice. We also introduced things like face detection. And as much as everyone likes to love the focus pullers, right? Face detection still in mirrorless gave a new opportunity for people that were starting off in cinema who didn't have the ability to kind of change zone focus or had a second person do that for them. And for them, that technology was quite very interesting. We also had in-camera slow motion 5 times at 120 frames per second. Still, we had to kind of do some trickery with that to make it possible in that time. And we had to do some vertical line skipping to make it possible to actually even capture that. But those are some of the things that we did with this particular camera. But I still say we were not ready at Fujifilm with a dedicated camera. In 2018, we launched our very first camera that had in-body image stabilization. And how many here have filmed with a gimbal? Right. For me, gimbals are great, but they're such a pain in the ass, right? The time you set up, the time you have to kind of level everything, and you shoot, 2 hours pass. And so IBIS, I think, in mirrorless, became a very important part of, I guess, Fuji's development in film. This was one of our times where we actually launched our first mirrorless camera. I don't think in Super 35 that offered DCI 4K, so true 4K resolution. So the XH1, of course, now it's sold out completely Canada-wide because the price was ridiculous, had quite a lot of things to it, right? A lot of cameras before this time were filming in very low bit rate, 36 megabits per second, which in post, it just breaks apart. So we're looking at 200 megabits per second. We also took our movie heritage, took our profile of Eterna film, and baked that right into the footage as well. So if you wanted to quickly film some documentaries, you can get this very cinematic-like look, have greater dynamic range, more latitude for highlights and shadows, and get this sort of movie 24p looking footage without any work at all if you're not a color grader. We also started to think about how mirrorless could grow beyond just photographs. And so we started to make a separate movie menu, separate from photo. In fact, we also had a mode called silent movie mode, which ignored all these amazing diodes and apertures and had just separate settings so that when you wanted to shoot at 24p, you had 1/48th of a second shutter speeds, right? And not the set dial that you couldn't change on most mirrorless cameras. We added things like time codes, tally lights. We actually got some cinematographers to talk to us in Japan, and we started writing down everything that we needed to get serious into cinema. So this was really our second big stepping stone in the mirrorless realm for cinema. And we also threw in some nice preamps as well. I know everyone wants to do external recording, but you'd be very surprised on how great the Fujifilm preamps were in 2008. But we also launched MKX lenses and MK lenses at the same time. So making Fujinon being a big part of our company, we all started to kind of gather closer in Japan and talk to each other about the different products. And we started to bring in the MK E-mount, which of course, we wanted a very affordable cinema lens, that was parafocal, had all the features that any cine lens had, but didn't break the bank. And you can get these cine lenses for just around $5,200, right? $10,000 for a full set to cover a full movie if you needed to. And that, if you are a documentary photographer or just doing any shorts, this is probably the best budget you can get for high quality. And the level and quality of a cinema lens over a standard photographic lens is incredible, right? I always shot with a lot of photographic lenses. We have an 18 to 55. Then we had this amazing 16 to 55 2.8 lens. And then we had this cinema lens, and it was just a new level of sharpness that I've never seen in lenses before. Late 2018, we introduced our 4th generation technology. And this technology now offered things like basically 4K 60p in a camera recording at 422 10-bit. So the most affordable camera at $1,900 to do 422 10 bits internally in the camera itself. It's in a super 35mm format, I think it's quite incredible. It brought a lot of things, right? Everyone says my phone shoots 4K, but not all 4K is equal, right? And we started to deal with a very high quality, high speed sensor, very low rolling shutter. I don't think anyone talks about mirrorless and shows all this wobbling that's happening. And when you look at the X-T3, and if you have a chance to go to Profusion, actually, you'll see how great, and how minimized rolling shutter is on the X-T3. No more crop in 4K. So you have full readout. In fact, it oversampled 6K footage to create 4K. So one of the sharpest resolving mirrorless APS-C camera out in the marketplace. There's quite a lot of other things as well, including things like BT2100, which is HLG support. We also brought in H.265 as well as all intra. Not to say that everyone could edit in H.265, but these are things that we started to do. And because of that, last year, we won for the best photo video camera because of just what it offered to the customer and for the price point. And we took a lot of feedback. It also launched face and eye detection in video. So when you are filming, it's tracking all the time as well, very accurate. And most recently, we even updated the firmware to make it even more accurate. And that was one of the things that Fuji kind of started off with. I just wanted to show you just a quick clip. This is a short film called Memento of Life. This is DP cinematographer Nick Thomas in Calgary. And he was tasked in making a little short film. It was shot entirely with the X-T3. And he basically had 6 hours in this location. And I kind of set him up with all the lenses he needed. And he told me 2 days after the filming, Billy, I didn't have enough time. I just shot the whole damn thing with one lens. And that was the MKX 18 to 55. So I just want to show you a quick footage of that today. But as you can see, it's kind of rigged up a little bit. But it's purely just the X-T3. And it's just a short little trailer. But what I want you to see is the different scenes that are being captured here by one camera and one cine lens. So he didn't change it for any of the different scenarios here. So if you imagine that you're just a starting cinematographer and wanted to get into real video, 5,000 plus 2,000, that's 7,000, and you have basically this type of footage here. Mind you, all the people being in the background helping out, of course. And you can see the full feature of this on YouTube if you do a Google search, Nick Thomas. And you don't want to know the budget on this one for him. It was like $6,000 I gave him. So it was really a labor of love on filming that footage, but that was purely an X-T3 with one lens. And then just one more. Oh. Yeah. And you know, to go beyond the budget, we actually got Matthew from basically Iron Man and Black Swan and a bunch of other great videos, movies, to film actually a true motion picture short film, and it's called A Different Beyond. And again, this was filmed entirely with the X-T3 as well. So this budget was $250,000. So you can see the full episode of that, of course, on YouTube as well. But just some possibility if you're starting out in video. And in fact, you know, if you're on a budget, we've actually partnered with Fusion Cine, and they actually have an X-T3 MKX kit included with a small rig cage and a 4K recorder, so that you can actually try this out. So they have locations in Toronto here, as well as in Vancouver and Montreal. And it's a free kit to loan out if you want just to test out that. And you have 2 pairs of MKX lenses to go with that. So 2019, right? Where are we now? And this is kind of the end of my presentation, but we just launched a medium format camera that offers 422 10-bit. This is incredible. No one else has kind of played in medium format and has brought new technology in medium format in the form of mirrorless. And here's a camera now that you can create that medium format look by you know, looking at this GFX 100 camera. It has a diameter of 55 millimeters. And if you can afford a Premista lens, which is like $45,000, right? It fits onto the GFX 100. Not the budget-friendly system, but imagine now where you can go and create the different scenes you can, you know, using a much larger sensor with greater dynamic range. You can have much better fall off. And really, this is just little steps to where Fuji really wants to be. So that's just my little kind of Fuji timeline on mirrorless cameras. Thank you.
Excellent.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Bob Cornelia, and I love the fonts. So I came to Blackmagic 10 years ago when they bought DaVinci. I was at DaVinci, and I always like to say I was the youngest guy at DaVinci and became the oldest guy at Blackmagic overnight. 10 years later, if it weren't for the acquisitions of other companies that were old, I'd still be that. But we bought like Sintel and some of these other guys, and they're kind of old too. A lot of times people ask, you know, what's the best way to keep up on all the updates to all 200 products that we have? And if you follow us on Twitter, it's all we basically do is say where we're going to be and what new software update is. And I actually had to create a homepage for myself so that every morning I know what software update is new. Clearly not for my keynote. Talking about cameras, 2012, I believe, was the year that we launched our first camera, and then the following year we came out with this original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, which was an HD camera, had an MFT mount, and it did very well for us. And but for years, people kept asking when we were going to come out with the 4K version of the Pocket camera. And but before I get there, I wanted to show you this. So that's about 2011 when we had our first camera that we were trying to build, which didn't look quite like that, but kind of close. But at the time, it was just the first way we got one of our cameras to actually pump out an image to an old Mac. But when we did introduce the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, I like to say that we went from a tight jeans pocket camera to a cargo pants pocket camera. It is slightly larger, as it would have had to be. The good thing is I don't know the prices in Canadian dollars, so I won't give them. But we came out with that product as an advancement to the original Pocket, in the sense that some of the things that we did in the original, we tried to improve in the new one. You know, better sensor. We kept the MFT mount just because people had used a lot of MFT lenses in the first camera, and so this way they could use the same lenses, because after all, there's a lot of expense in those. And then we added a couple other things to have more tactile controls. There is a touch screen as opposed to the original. But it was also to access, like I said, all the lenses that people already had spent money on. But the thing that we started to do is we improved our dynamic range and also our ISO to have a dual ISO. So in this case, we have a native 400 and 3200, and it goes all the way up to 25,600, which is a number I had to memorize. The idea being that, you know, somewhere, the sweet spot is somewhere in the 1200, I think it's 1250, that you know, depending on which way you want to, if you want to protect highlights or lowlights, depending on which end of the ISO you want to shoot for. And then in our version 4.0 color science that we developed, and again, this is all sort of based in the DaVinci Resolve work that we do, which you know, not only deals with our cameras, but all the cameras that we talk about today. We added some other things, including the new Batman design. It looks like something Alfred made in the Batcave. It's a polybicarbonate composite. And then when we came out with the original, as I say, was an MFT, but not far after the launch of the 4K, we announced a 6K, and the 6K was the Super 35 sensor and the EF mount. And as the gentleman from Canon mentioned, you know, people often ask, you know, why did you pick the EF mount? And I said, because they've sold 100 million lenses. So it made another. And so because some of the cameras that we've developed over the years had EF mounts, we came out and we were able to put an EF mount on the original. Even though they look oddly sized there, they are the same size with the exception of the mount in the front. And if you see 6K on the front, then you know it's the 6K, and if you don't, then it's the 4K. One of the other things is that we changed from the original design was our battery system, that we were using the Canon batteries in the body, and then eventually we've come out with this new battery grip, which we'll have on the show floor if everybody comes over, that will extend the battery life, because the higher frame rates start to eat up battery. And that's what the battery grip looks like. And also we added USB-C on the cameras to be able to go out to an SSD. So if you're shooting, you know, some of the larger file sizes and shoot for length, you're going to need some more storage. So this way you can go out to an SSD drive. So that's where that port comes in. And also, and it's kind of funny, originally, you can see there are two record buttons. Initially, I wasn't quite sure, but then after I saw people rigging them, I realized that it's probably good to have the access to an extra button, because people cover up one or the other with all the rigs that they use. And that flywheel that's just above that guy's finger, that's something that you can select any of the menus and then use that as a dial to spin through, say, ISO or white balance or any of the other settings. As you hit them on the touchscreen, you can actually spin that little flywheel there to go around the different menu settings. The touchscreen is new, obviously, to the Pocket from the original. But the menu system, which we call our Blackmagic operating system, is the same system that you'll see not only on our camera line, but now on some of the other products, like our Video Assist product and our HyperDeck products. They all have the same sort of format and look to all the monitoring, all the menu structure. And that helps a lot when people are moving between products, or if they're shooting with two different cameras, or maybe one of our larger cameras and one of the Pocket cameras. This way, the menu system is all the same and easy for people to navigate. And then we added Bluetooth to these cameras as well as the larger ones, and this allows people, there's an app that Blackmagic developed, but there's also an SDK for people to develop their own apps, which they have. You know, I personally would like to lock out people from using this and being able to hit the record button, unless I want to do it. But you can enter metadata and do different things. You can actually, there's one app that somebody developed where you can zoom and focus the camera through the app. You don't get video return, but it's just for control. So this way, if it's up high or on a drone or something like that, if it's within Bluetooth range, then you can do some dialing in there. We added a lot of built-in microphones. There's 4 built-in microphones, 2 on each side of the lens, and then we have an external mini XLR input, so you can bring in external microphone. We put all the different ports on the side, and then we have these little rubber boots that flip out of the way so you can get to the different things. There's an additional mic input there, a headphone jack, a full-size HDMI, the power, the USB, as I said earlier, to get out to an external SSD, and as well as the audio. And there it is on the other one. And where am I? Oh, right. And on the other side is where we record to either the CFast 2 cards or the SD cards. And then there's that SSD. As I say, both cameras are available now, and they are, oddly, that doesn't look right from here, but they look different in size, but they're not. It's really just the front turret. So between the Micro Four Thirds and then the EF. Obviously, for it's one of those things where people shoot 4K to finish in HD. You can shoot 6K to finish in 4K, so that you have a little extra wiggle room there to frame. And that looks like a Canon lens. So that's another shot of the back there. The thing about the new, both new cameras is that they take advantage of our Blackmagic RAW. Oh boy, they gave me too many of these. I'm spinning through. We don't need to see all the pretty shots. I want to get down to talk about our Blackmagic RAW, which is our recording format that launched at IBC in 2018. So it's just a little over a year old. And the reason that we built Blackmagic RAW was just to get a faster format, but also a single format. And what I mean by that is that normally if you're working in a RAW workflow, you shoot RAW, then you have to make some proxies with a LUT on it so that somebody can edit with it, and then somebody will color grade it later or whatever. This kind of does both in one. It's light enough. It's all part of the 4.0. It's light enough that you can use it in an edit session. So if you shoot in Blackmagic RAW, you can go right to a laptop, and the files are pre-debayered or demosaicked in camera, so that we're able to play them back easily off of a laptop. And also because of the way that we do the compression of the RAW file, we're able to make the sizes of the files a lot smaller than traditional codecs. So that has been very well received. It's worked out very well because, as I say, there's only one file. So if you instead of saying, oops, we gave the RAW files to the editor and the colorist got the compressed ones, this way they each get the same one. You turn off the LUT when you're doing the color grading, and you can go back to the RAW file. And then later, when so if you're editing a project and someone else is color grading it, they can just send you back a metadata file basically that just updates. So there's no reconform, none of that. It just updates the color and you go. So it was all part, as I said, this partial demosaic in the camera, which allows us to do that, and that gives the faster playback speed. So when you're looking at being able to use that in Resolve, you can play a whole bunch of streams of this larger bit rate, and it's one of these things that it supports a lot of embedded metadata. There's just a lot more range that you can provide, not only for the color, but also just providing more detail to everybody that's involved in the project. There's also a RAW player that you don't need DaVinci Resolve to actually play it. And and Blackmagic RAW rather has become pretty well supported in the other NLEs. At IBC this year, we announced a plugin for both Adobe and Avid, and other manufacturers have also adopted it. And we even have the ability in an upcoming product to be able to record RAW from the Canon C500 Mark II, I believe it, yeah, and our C300 Mark II, and the Panasonic EVS-1. So recording Blackmagic RAW. So in order to get Blackmagic RAW as a recording format for a camera, we need to work with them in conjunction with them to get sensor data that enables us to optimize the recording so that we're able to get the files to be properly processed in camera, and then of course afterwards in Resolve or something else. We have a free software developer kit, so there is no licensing if anyone's going to start supporting the Blackmagic RAW. That we're not supposed to say B-RAW or BRAW, but people do. And that's what a file looks like if it's plopped on your desktop. I guess we'll have the Q&A later. So again, to find out more information on anything, go to blackmagicdesign.com. But also, if you want to keep up to date with all the different updates that we do to software, there you are. And we'll see you on the panel later. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Mark Cruz from Nikon. We actually have another rep here in the audience, Chris as well, Oganek from Nikon Canada. So we have a couple of us here to answer some of your questions. I'll just take my time here to address the fact that this is the first time we've been invited, I guess, to this SMPTE panel. And I guess the reason why we haven't in the past is because probably our video offering has just skyrocketed in the past year. And that started in August of 2018 when we announced a brand new format that is the Z format. So Nikon is a 102-year-old company. They started in 1917. They're well known for their DSLR cameras, but we're going to talk about the mirrorless cameras for your video production. So we have, since last August, two models, Z6 and Z7. And I'll just kind of go over some of the features of those cameras right now. I mean, the feedback that we've been getting from these cameras from the professional market has been pretty good so far. And I'm just going to skip right to the point and show you guys some of the benefits of it. Since the inception of this new camera system, we've had the ability to make it compatible with a wide variety of existing Nikon glass. But with the advent of the new mount, we're now able to, similarly to Canon's solution, come up with new optical designs. So just to cut to the chase here, what you see on the left-hand or the right-hand side is the regular F mount, and on the left-hand side is the new Z mount. And the statistics on the new Z mount are it has a 16mm back flange distance. So it's very, very, very thin, the distance from the rear element to the sensor itself. So this is really the strength of this format, as well as the 55mm mount diameter. So if you've been taking some notes tonight, the 55mm mount diameter, this is for a full frame 24 by 36mm sensor. So both the Z6 and Z7 are full frame format, okay? We do have a crop sensor that we just announced last week, and I'll get to that at the end of the presentation, but the main thing are these two models, the Z6 and Z7. They're identical. When you look at the bodies, the major difference is in the sensor. For video production, most people are using the Z6, but the statistics are those, the 16mm flange distance. And what we can accomplish with these two specifications here are basically wider apertures, that we can create lenses with a wider aperture. So we are at Profusion Show tomorrow. Stop by our booth. We have a 58mm 0.95 Noct lens in our booth. So come by, and see that the limitations on the F-mount before was we could never manufacture a lens wider than 1.4. Now we have the capabilities of going well beyond that and getting more light in at 0.95. But the distance, the minimum flange distance, and if you compare it to our previous design with the F-mount, it's a third of the distance. The F-mount was 46.5 millimeters. This is 16 millimeters. It's a third of the distance. So we're drastically reducing the distance from the rear element to the sensor. And what this gives us is we really now have to reimagine the way we select lenses. And what this gives us now is the ability to traditionally in our F-mount system, to get maximum resolution, the sharp image, you really have to stop down at least 1 or 2 stops from the maximum aperture of the lens. That has to do with the way the mount is built, the distance from the optic to the sensor. Now, with this reimagined optical performance, we can create lenses that deliver maximum resolution even wide open. So that's a game changer. If we could take all the existing F-mount lenses right now and say that, that would be a game changer for all our F-mounts. But we really needed to recreate the mount in order to do this. And in addition to that, we can also create lenses with wider apertures. Okay, so last year we came out with the system that we launched it with about 3 lenses to begin with. Okay, there was a couple of primes as well as our zoom lens. Today, this is the current lineup that we have. Not included here are 2 crop sensor lenses that we just announced last week. So in addition to that, Nikon is traditionally a very conservative company. They don't release what they're going to be coming out with until the day of announcement. There's a roadmap right now that already lists several lenses that we're coming out with next year and in the several months to come. So going into the future, it can make someone looking at this format, which is relatively new, it's only a little over a year old, confidence in that there's going to be several optical options to put in front of that very large Z-mount. Now, one of the benefits of the new Z-mount, because of all those, oh, just a second here, let me just skip back. Are we in a screensaver right? No, hold on a second. Is lack of focus breathing. Oh, you know what? PowerPoint. It just screwed it all up. Okay. The lack of focused breathing is what I wanted to get at here. I think, Chris, is it going back? Is it? It started at the beginning? Okay, it will get to it. Okay, this is just the full thing. I just wanted to mention that typically with our F-mount lenses, there was a lot of focused breathing. So for those of you that are in the video community, you already know what that is. I have a small, it's coming up in about 5 seconds here. It's going to show you the benefits of that. But essentially with the new Z-mount lenses, specifically the S series in that line. So we've rebranded them. Typically we have a gold ring on our lenses that denotes the highest level of Nikon lenses. We now branded it as S-line, and those lenses have very limited focus breathing. So if this comes up at least in the next 3 seconds, I won't ditch this. But we also have new coatings on the lenses as well that inhibit things like flare, ghosting, coma, a lot of the aberrations that we usually see and that we can't get around simply because of that the small lens, but also because of these new coatings that we've developed to minimize a lot of these aberrations that we see. It's kind of funny because we were talking to some video producers and they actually like the flare, so they actually scrape off the coatings. So this is an example of focus breathing on a conventional lens. When you're focusing from the foreground to the background, you will actually get a change in the focal length of the lens, even if it's a prime lens. With our new Nikon Z series, that is tremendously minimized. So focusing from the close to the back is something similar that, or that would approximate a true cine lens. Okay, so this is something that we're happy to introduce in a very consumer-oriented price product line. Okay. In addition to that, for video, oh gosh, okay, I'm ditching it. But bottom line is the. In addition to the focus breathing, the silence of the autofocus mechanism has been drastically improved because of new stepping motors in our lenses. With DSLR, when we've retrofitted our DSLR lenses onto these new mounts, or even in our traditional DSLR format, the problem was the sound of the autofocus motors. They would always be caught by the internal microphone. Even if you attached an external microphone, you always hear that loud sound. We have new stepping motors in it that make it not virtually silent, well, essentially virtually silent, okay? In addition to that, we have customizations in the camera that can adjust focus speeds. So Billy was talking earlier about not being able to have focus pullers for your lenses. If you're a one-man operation, having the ability to change the AF speed will make your focus pulls more customizable, okay? And we have that option in video. We have time code that we can do in there as well in the Z6 and Z7. But this is really the power of the mount adapters, that we can harness any of the 92 existing F-mount lenses and 363 in the existence of the F-mount since it was conceived in 1959. So there are a lot of choices. Why would you go look at the system? It's really the system of lenses that you have access to. We only have maybe 10 lenses right now on the Z-mount, but you have access to over 92 with full functionality using that adapter. And the benefits of that adapter is that you have the ability to use the in-camera IBIS of the Z6 and Z7 to get VR. So we've talked a little bit tonight about in-lens stabilization as well as in-camera stabilization, IBIS, in-body image stabilization. The Z6 and Z7 have that. So when you're using existing F-mount lenses, if you have an old 20-year-old F-mount manual focus lens, it actually gets better when you put it on the Z6 and Z7 because of the in-body image stabilization. You now have a camera that has VR, okay? Or IS if you know that terminology, okay? So here is an F-mount lens. You have that adapter. You can change it similarly to what Canon was saying. In our case, it's 8 pins to 11 pins, but now you have the ability of getting the stabilization. Every lens that you put on there, regardless of it having stabilization in the lens, will now have it from the body, and it will give it a third axis. So traditionally, the lens has 2 axes, up, down, left, right. The body will give it a roll axis as well. However, if you're using the native Z-mount lenses, the ability to get 5 axis is even better. So again, as Billy was saying, people that don't like gimbals and having the ability to just have IBIS, you now have 5 axis that it will compensate for. And that's up, down, left, right, roll, and then pitch and yaw. Okay, so that's a big game changer. In addition to that, the slim 16 millimeter flange distance means that it is very compatible with other third-party, other brand lenses out there, because we can adapt it to this very, very thin flange distance. We have some adapters that are just that thin, I think, for some different lenses out there. And you can find the adapter out there and mount it onto the Z mount. Again, this is all coming in the last year. Just a quick note here on the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit. I think you're all a technical audience, but essentially you're quadrupling the tonality range. And we have this now on 10-bit external signal from the HDMI port to something like an Atomos Ninja through our N-Log now. So that's only available for N-Log. Internal is 8-bit recording, okay? There are a lot of statistics, but just to give you this background here, so with our N-Log, you have much more ability for color grading. I think all of you are aware of that. But what I want to highlight with the Z6 is really the ProRes RAW relationship with Atomos. And we have an impending firmware update coming out that will release the following. I'm crossing my fingers that this will play. Not from the beginning. Okay, bear with me. It's from the beginning. So this is just a short preview of what we're coming out with soon in a firmware update that will release the potential of 12-bit ProRes RAW coming out of the Z6 onto a Ninja 5 recorder. Okay? No, it's okay. Okay. So that is coming. We announced that in January of this year. We've announced several updates to the camera. So this is 12-bit RAW. Again, you're taking it another several thousand gradations up. So your color grading is going to be much more easy. With RAW, you also get the ability of using the entire native ISO range. So unlike N-Log, you don't have to start at 800 ISO. You can actually start at 100 ISO. Okay, so that's a big game changer too, is that you can use the entire native range of the sensor of the camera. In addition to that, you can utilize some of the various frame rates in the camera from 60p to 30p, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Oh, sorry. Speaking of the relationship with Atomos, now there's a lot of people using our cameras for video production. And as you will see at Profusion when you attend tomorrow or Thursday, there's a lot of manufacturers out there, Shape, that create all these different rigs. We thought we'd make it really easy on people just by putting everything all in one kit. So we actually introduced this in North America, United States, as well as Canada. It's the Z6 Filmmakers Kit. Instead of piecemealing all these little gadgets little by little and a la carting everything, you can actually buy everything in one kit. This is actually a Nikon SKU, and it includes the Atomos Ninja 5 monitor recorder. We partnered with Rode to put in a Pro microphone in there, as well as the Moza Air 2 gimbal. So in addition to the in-camera IBIS, you can get really frustrated, right, with the gimbal and waste 2 hours. But it also comes with the Z6, the 24-70 f4 lens, as well as the FTZ adapter. We put 2 batteries in there, the HDMI cable, as well as an arm to put the Atomos Ninja onto a tripod head, or even the Moza Air 2 gimbal. There's actually an arm screw on there for it. Okay, so I'm almost done. Just mention a couple more features in here. Again, if you're using old Nikkor lenses, it's fashionable once again, because unlike using an SLR in the past, we never had peaking in SLRs. We have peaking in here, so you can use your old Nikkor lenses with full confidence because you can see where your focus plane is going to be. I do want to mention that we do have 120 frames per second recording in here. And what's key about this is that there is an option to build it inside camera, but also do it in post, so that you can benefit from sound. So we can also record 120 frames per second with sound, and it's up to you to slow it down in post. Okay, so unfortunately it's playing from the beginning. I actually went to a point in the video where the sound was going in slow motion as well. But I'll just, you can imagine that. Oops. And I think I'm just going to end here by mentioning, if you come to our booth tomorrow, just the other day, we were in New York at the Photo Plus show, Chris and I, and we were debuting the release of this new camera on November 7th, I believe it was. This is the Z50. I told you about the Z6 and Z7. If you're looking to do video from Nikon's perspective, you really want to look at the Z6. But if you're a vlogger on a budget, the Z50, which is in production now, is probably our best vlogging camera because it has a monitor that flips all the way down 180 degrees so you can see yourself on it, on the screen, okay? How did I do on time?
Pretty well.
Okay, good. So that was it. I'll see you guys on the panel. Okay?
Excellent.
So good evening. Nice to see all of you. So I'm the National Business Development Manager for Professional Imaging. I look after the Panasonic Pro line of cameras from VariCam down to EVA1, CX350, our systems cameras, PTZs, etc. Reed invited me to talk about mirrorless cameras, which actually comes from our consumer division, but because there's a lot of crossover and they were afraid to come here, I volunteered, or voluntold myself to come. How's that? So how do we advance this? Okay, so the Panasonic this year introduced the S series of mirrorless cameras, but in 2008 they introduced the first mirrorless micro four thirds camera in the industry with the G series camera. Before that they had an L series, which was a single lens reflex or DSLR, but the G series really took off, moved Panasonic forward in the mirrorless camera market. The next camera that came out in 2008 was the GH1, which was the first hybrid camera that could record still and video, HD video back then. Since then, we've seen GH2, GH3, GH4, GH5, GH5S, and as I mentioned here, the new S series cameras. So all the G series cameras were micro four thirds, and the S series now is a full frame camera system. So Earlier in the summer, the S1 came out, which was a full-frame, 24-megapixel camera system. And then the S1R, which was also full-frame, but it was more focused on still photography. So the S1 was a still video camera. S1R was a still camera primarily. Still did video, but it was a 47-megapixel sensor versus a 24-megapixel sensor. What we've recently introduced, and we started shipping this month, is the S1H, which is the professional level full-frame hybrid still and video camera with all professional features that you would expect to see in Vericam and EVA1 type cameras. So as I mentioned, the S1R is 47 megapixel, the S1 at 24 megapixel, 6 stops of dynamic range, 5-axis dual image stabilization built in, high precision shutter, blah, blah, blah. So you guys can read, there's a lot of information here. So HLG, or hybrid log gamma, for HDR production, and 4K 60p video. The idea with the S1H was to develop a consumer type camera, but target cinematographers and the professional video market, as well offer a camera solution for smaller budget production. So these were the features that they tried to, that they sort of recognized being important in cinema capture. One is dual native ISO. So Panasonic introduced dual native ISO in 2013 with the Vericam 35. And it was unbelievable. It took a long time for people to really understand what dual native ISO actually means. But what it means is the camera has 2 amplifier circuits in the electronics. To be able to read, one amplifier reads the signals coming off the sensor at a native ISO of 800. And a second amplifier in the camera can read the electrical signals coming off the sensor at ISO 5000 in the Vericam 35. In EVA1, that dual sensor was 800 and 2500. And now with the S1H, it's 640 and 4000. So the whole idea of dual native ISO is to be able to reproduce the same color information and the same dynamic range as you would at 800, you can create at 4000 or 5000. There is slightly more noise at 4000 because it's unavoidable. There's a technology called shot noise. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, or Poisson noise. Essentially, it's a physics, it's a physical, it's part of the physics of light, in that when you have such low light, the light is hitting, let's say, this surface. If you were to shoot a shotgun at the wall and it was a 50-50 pellet shotgun, you'd create essentially a hole. If you took that same shotgun shell and shoot only 5 pellets at the wall, you would see a pattern. You would see actually the pattern of the shells, the individual holes. Same thing happens in light, where light will actually, even the slides are telling me to move forward. I can explain it, but essentially what you're getting is shot noise, where there's just not enough photons to actually provide the information to the sensor. So it's not the same as gain noise. It's actually shot noise, and you can look it up. There's all kinds of papers on the internet explaining it. So the idea was to also produce a 422 10-bit camera, 6K full-frame capture, multi-aspect recording like anamorphic in 4.3, 10-bit cinema with 4K 60p or 50p recording, VFR, high dynamic range, unlimited video recording time, et cetera, et cetera. So the SH1, when it's launched, it has all the features I just mentioned before. As I mentioned, it was a brand new sensor that was developed by Panasonic. It was actually developed by the same engineering team that developed the sensor for the Vericam and the Vericam LT. So again, 422 10-bit, 14 plus stops of dynamic range in V-Log. And has anyone used Vericam recently out here? So V-Log is essentially our version of S-Log, F-Log, C-Log in Canon. What are you guys using for log? But you're not doing a log? Oh, okay. So it essentially gives you all 14 plus stops of dynamic range. And the way they work at is 0 would be equivalent to about 43% IRE, or what we call skin tone. Gives you 8.5 stops below and 6.5 stops above of dynamic range. If you're seeing a lot of noise and shadows, it's typically because you're not exposing properly to the 43% IRE 0 point on the camera. Cameras all do come with spot meters built in, going back to the old film camera days where you'd have a separate handheld spot meter. So there is a spot meter in the camera to allow you to actually read the scene, to make sure that you're not underexposing where you should be exposing normally. As I mentioned, a new 24 megapixel sensor with a low pass filter. This reduces moire when you're looking at, for example, LED backlit screens or people with striped shirts, for example. Dual native ISO, anamorphic mode, so we can support all the squeeze sizes and the screen sizes in anamorphic. So again, 6.5 stop correction power. I don't even know what this means. Anyway, 5-axis dual image stabilization. How's that? System frequency. So camera can operate in North American frequencies or in international frequencies. So 59.94 or 50 hertz. Time code, different selections for time code, color bars, SMPTE bars, EBU, ARIB. Luminance level for 10-bit, so being able to measure luminance on the sensor. Waveform monitor, zebra pattern. So again, a lot of professional features that you wouldn't find in a typical consumer level camera. But as I mentioned, this was designed for professional use. Cinelike gammas, if you want to bake in some of your bake in your color curves, these are available in the camera as well. Tilt-free angle rear mirror. So the monitor can flip up as well as it can tilt in any angle for any type of shooting application. 1.8 high resolution status LCD. So we've actually created on here a home screen similar to what you would see on a cinema camera. So a cinematographer can see all the information on the LCD screen of what's happening with the camera. So you can see the ISO, you can see the shutter angle, you can see the audio bars, you can see the color space, everything from a single home screen, which is, if anyone's used Arri cameras, you'll be very familiar with that home screen. It's very useful for an operator because then they can see exactly what's going on with the camera at a glance without having to drill down menus. Also the rear EVF. Camera has night mode, live view boost, so you can actually see what you're trying to focus on at night, and manual focus assist, so a 20 times zoom to allow you to focus more accurately. Joysticks, touch control, a lot of the stuff that's available in pretty well everyone's cameras. This is just spelling it out. Now, when you're shooting 4K or 6K video, you tend to create a little device that can cook eggs probably on the screen. So we have to be able to disperse the heat. So Panasonic has a heat dispersing design via an internal fan structure. So the camera can actually reduce the heat substantially. It's dust and splash resistant design, freeze resistance. It's a magnesium alloy body. So any camera product that Panasonic makes, we've been putting a magnesium alloy body underneath all the plastic. So it may look plastic on the outside, but it's pretty solid on the inside. Autofocus technology. So we've been developing our own autofocus technology for a while now. That's okay. You guys can be confidential. We just have to sign something here. No, it's an old presentation. So we're doing depth from defocus. So the camera will focus and defocus at a very fast rate in order to determine what the focus should be. We also face and eye detection, and then we've also built in deep learning. So there's deep learning in the actual processor in the camera to be able to understand what certain items are, human body, animals, those types of things. So it can use these to try to focus faster. And I believe we're down to 0.08 seconds accurate focus now with the autofocus. So it's actually sampling at 480 frames per second internally in order to achieve that high autofocus capability. We can also focus accurately at -3 EV or even down to -6 EV in low light situations. Human body, as I mentioned, with animals, this stuff is all built into the processor of the camera to recognize these items automatically. So that's it on the camera. Now, with the introduction of the full frame, obviously the micro four thirds lenses wouldn't work, so Panasonic decided to create an alliance with Leica and with Sigma. So the three companies have combined together to create a L-mount alliance. So the idea was to have multiple manufacturers support a single lens mount in order to increase the number of lenses available into the market and also give more flexibility to the end user. So at this to date, the L mount has, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So a total of 37 cinema lenses from Leica, 13 cinema lenses from Sigma, and I believe right now there's 4 lenses from Panasonic, which will expand to about 14 lenses by this time next year. So it is a lens mount system that's not just, it's again designed like the gentleman from Nikon said, it's designed to move Panasonic forward in the future, as well as supporting other manufacturers' product with that same mount. And last but least, the S1H is now the first mirrorless camera approved by Netflix because of its vlog capability and its ability to capture in a ABC ultra codec. Alongside the VariCam 35, the LT, the VariCam Pure, the EVA1, and our UC4000 studio camera. So all of these are now Netflix approved. So they can record internally in AVC or can record externally to Adamus or Convergent Design external recorders in RAW. And that's it.
Okay, hey, how's it going, everybody? They had to give the presenters with the most anxiety the very last spot. I think I've sweated through all my clothes already, but. So today's subject, mirrorless cameras for video production. So I figure the reason why most of you guys here are here tonight is to figure, can I actually use mirrorless cameras in my production? So to answer that question, I kind of wanted to look at 2 Hollywood productions that have already used mirrorless cameras, the reason why they chose mirrorless cameras, and the solutions that they actually picked. So the first one is the possession of Hannah Grace. So they chose to shoot with the A7S II, and there's a couple of reasons why they chose to shoot with this mirrorless camera. One is the director really wanted to shoot anamorphic, and he really wanted to shoot full frame for that very narrow depth of field. So at the time of that this was shot, I think this was 2016, a full frame cinema camera was way too expensive for their budget. But with the A7S, and he had a very good relationship with a lens company called Hawk that produced anamorphic lenses that had a 1.3 times squeeze. So he was able to shoot with those lenses on the A7S and get full anamorphic 4K with that solution. So a couple of benefits from that is that because the A7S and the A7S II in that regard are extremely inexpensive cameras, especially when you compare it to full-fledged cinema cameras like our Venice and etc. You're talking about 4 digits in price rather than 5 or 6, right? So for this production, they're actually shooting with 6 of those Hawk lenses, 240s, 265s, and 290s. Because of the relative low cost of these mirrorless cameras that gave them excellent results, they just bought 6 cameras and put 1 camera per lens. So they had 6 rigs. So part of the problem with having a limited budget is you also have a limited time. The longer time you shoot, the more expensive the production is. So if you have 6 lenses that you're using for your entire production, and you have 6 cameras that are mounted to those lenses, anytime you need to change to a different type of rig or you want to change to a different lens, they just swapped it out. There's almost no time for that. So he found that pretty incredible. So if you haven't watched this movie yet, I haven't. I can't take horror movies. I'm like the most chicken in my family. But the whole, apparently with horror movies, it's very dark, that kind of very dark ambient light. And one of the specialities of the A7S, and it's really renowned for this, is its low light capabilities. So they're able to shoot very, very low light with just the ambient, ambient light around there and create this mood with a very, very low budget. So that's the reason why they chose the A7S for their production. And this is a full Hollywood production as well. So moving on, the next one is actually full disclosure, this is a Sony pictures, but they actually combined several different cameras, including a cinema camera. So this is an instance where they didn't just use mirrorless cameras, they used a cinema camera along as with a couple of other solutions. So first, they used the RX0. So if you look at the form factor of this camera, many times it's confused for a GoPro. They always say, hey, is that your GoPro camera? I don't blame them because of the form factor, but it's significantly different. First, it's extremely rugged. It's a milled aluminum body. Like when I demonstrate this at shows, I just drop it on the floor and step on it, right? I won't be able to do any damage. So they're able to literally gaffer tape this all over the cars to get that point of view. There's a 24mm Zeiss lens on that and a 1-inch sensor. So you get great quality and you don't get that ultra-wide distorted picture for it. But moving on to the mirrorless, you can see they didn't just shoot with the A7S II. The thing with what Sony's great at is our sensors. We actually dominate the sensor market. We own over 40% market share when it comes to sensors overall in the industry. And because of that, we have a lot of different sensors in our lineup. And the director, in this case, decided to use a couple of different ones for several different reasons. So The Proud Mary is an action movie. So there's a lot of movement, a lot of panning. So I think it's been mentioned here already. One of the problems with consumer level cameras is with CMOS sensors, you may get a rolling shutter, especially if you're doing quick whips, right? The A9 actually features, the Alpha 9 actually features a CMOS sensor called a stack CMOS sensor, without going into too much tech, because I only got 15 minutes. But the whole secret to that sensor is how fast it can output information. And one of the things that speed allows us to do is have a feature called an anti-distortion shutter. And that gives you a virtually a rolling shutter-free image, almost as good as a global shutter. You'd really, really have to slow down the video quite a lot just to see a little bit of bend in there. So that's why they use the A9 to shoot all the action scenes. And of course, the versatility of the A7S II for low light capabilities. So you might be asking, if they were shooting with a cinema camera, I think at this production was an Sony F55, why would they use mirrorless cameras? Mainly because, A, you can't strap an F55 to a car and get angles like this, especially not at the price point of an F55. And also for the smaller size of these full-frame cameras, you can put the cameras where you could not put a cinema camera. You can't put it on a dash. You can't get into the tight spaces. This is what a mirrorless solution will allow you to do for a higher-end production. So I just kind of wanted to go to the different sensors that we have in our lineup right now and the reasons why you would choose each one. So I already mentioned the A7S II. So that's a full-frame 4K output camera at 12 megapixels. So the whole secret to this camera is when you crop that 12 megapixels to 16:9, you get exactly 8-point-something megapixels, which is exactly the resolution of consumer 4K. So you get a pixel-to-pixel readout. You don't have to worry about any landscaping or any kind of interpolation to get it down to the size you need. And as a side benefit, because of the lower resolution of the sensor, each one of those photosensitive areas, the pixel pitch is much bigger, and that's what gives you the incredible low light of the A7S. A newer camera, the A7 III, actually features a 24 megapixel backside illuminated chip. So again, we can shoot full frame 4K with no crop at all on there. And another thing too is when you crop that to 16:9, you get 20 megapixels or about 6K. And then just like Billy mentioned as well, you can oversample that so you get more resolving power at full frame. So if you want to shoot 4K full frame and detail is what you're looking for your production, then maybe the A7S would be the best, the A7 III would be the best solution in that case. Moving on as well is our brand new A7R4. So this one is a much, much higher resolution sensor at 61 megapixels. So in full frame mode, there is no line skipping, but there is pixel binning. But if you are shooting, if you're mixing this camera into a production with other cinema cameras and you're shooting Super 35, when you crop this camera to Super 35, you get and 16:9 as well, you get 20 megapixels, and we can do a 6K oversample. So for productions that you're using Super 35 lenses, this would be the highest resolving power we have. Actually, alongside with our new Alpha 6600 as well, our APS-C size cameras, right? And as I already mentioned is our A9. So that's our 24 megapixel stacked CMOS chip. And again, the secret to that is how fast it can output information. So just to give you an example, we're one of the only ones that are able to, for pictures, we're only ones that were able to shoot at the Canadian Open because we can shoot silently. Not every, actually every camera in this room can shoot silently, but can't shoot a golf swing because you'll get a distortion because of the rolling shutter. The A9 can output information so fast that it looks like no distortion at all on that golf club. So that's the one on that one. One of the things that we've had for a while in our cameras is eye autofocus, and this has been a great advantage and a great technology that makes photography easier for our customers, but we've just added it to a couple of our cameras, the A7R4 and the A6600, so you can actually autofocus and track and focus on the eye no matter where it goes. So for a lot of productions, you probably think, like, I'm going to have a focus puller that's not going to matter, but we've already talked about the application of gimbals. You can't really touch the camera at all. You don't want to change the balance at all. Sometimes you want that autofocus in it, and this is where it really helps a lot, right? What happened? Oh, okay. So, you know, we have a great technology when it comes to tracking your subject and tracking the eyeball, but on top of that as well, we have a very advanced autofocus system. So instead of using your typical rotational type autofocusing when you're moving the elements back and forth, we actually use linear systems. And with the linear system, there's a lot less friction, so you can move the elements back and forth much faster and much more accurately. And of course, extremely quiet because there's no mechanical moving parts. When we created the E-mount, actually, we came out with the E-mount in 2010. So we created a couple of different things. We came out with our cinema cameras, and we came out with our consumer cameras. And from the inception of our E-mount, it was actually meant to be used both in the photo world and the video world. Here's a little bit of trivia. Do you know what the E stands for in E-mount? 18, because our flange distance is 18 millimeters. It's kind of funny how Sony names stuff, but that's what E-mount's all about. So yeah, we've had this mount since 2010, and we're up to 54 lenses right now on our E-mount on both full frame and APS-C. Oops. So as I mentioned before, this E-mount was conceived for both our photo and for our video markets. One of the things that we came out with Sony is a design philosophy called smooth motion optics. Mark's already mentioned that on his cameras, but some of the things that are really important when you're doing your video production is to make sure that you're par focal. So whether when you zoom in or you zoom out, that your focus doesn't shift. There's no actual shifting as well, and there's no focus breathing when it comes to our smooth motion optics. So right now we have 2 lenses in that lineup, our Super 35 18 to 110 f4, and that's both of them are powered zoom lenses as well, and our full frame 28 to 135. So we just actually announced our new cinema mount lenses, our 16 to 35 T1.3. So we haven't had too many details about that yet, but basically you'll have a much sharper image from center to edge and much better color brightness from center to edge as well.
I'm going to throw it right out to the crowd for questions at the back.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you guys, and this can go to all you guys, whoever wants to answer. What are the reasons why camera companies choose a sensor format? What is the advantage over an MFT versus full frame versus APS-C? I mean, for example, Blackmagic, it's not like there's shortage of real estate in their camera case, and yet they chose an MFT format. And you guys can probably talk about that.
Well, the original MFT was for the microphone. Oh, yeah, that would help. The original MFT for our pocket camera was based on the size of the camera that we were trying to make, and we needed a shallower flange as opposed to like an EF, which needs more distance. And then when we made the Pocket 4K, we wanted to keep the same mount so that people had the same, had lenses or whatever they used the first time to use them on the second time. And then the 6K version with the EF mount came based on the fact that people were requesting that too. So unlike these guys who have their own mounts, we have to make a lot of them.
Well, can you guys hear that? Just with regards to Fujifilm, when we started with Mirrorless, we wanted to pick a sensor size that really offered the true benefits of a mirrorless, right? And in that time, it was about photography, and we wanted to reduce the size and weight of the equipment, right? As photographers, especially wedding photographers, no one wants to lug big cameras and big gear all day long on an 8-hour shoot. And so, Fujifilm decided on APS-C, which is, Super 35 in video, but there's a perfect balance between offering low light capabilities, but still offering that ability to capture shallow depth of field, right? To get that balance between the two. And with mirrorless and lens design, you're able to make smaller lenses and still effectively capture the same amount of light, while also benefiting on a sensor slightly bigger than, say, Micro Four Thirds. And through technology on our sensor side, we actually, in all of our sensors, have no low pass filter. We develop a very unique filter array called X-Trans, which mimics the grain of film. And what we're trying to do is to randomize some of that noise to get more authentic grains in that and offer much higher resolution. And so by doing that type of technology, we didn't have to step up to a 35 millimeter format. And in past few years, people have asked us, why haven't you gone full frame? Nikon, Canon, Panasonic, Sony joined the group. You can see we don't want to be in that battle, right? And so we leap forward with our 55 millimeter medium format sensor instead, where we can offer that much greater of a potential in terms of isolation of subject, as well as increased dynamic range, which is very important in film. And again, just that medium format look. So that's kind of Fujifilm's kind of response to sensor.
Anybody else on that one?
I could talk a little bit about, so originally in film, you had essentially full frame 35, and you had, which essentially the film reel ran like this. Ran like this. So it was actually running on a horizontal plane. The accountants in Hollywood realized that if you put the film this way and have it run vertically, you could actually get more frames per foot of film by doing it. So the Super 35 sensor format came into existence. That's in the film world. So those formats have been around since the beginning of time. I think Super 35 came into existence about in the 1950s, and it was the primary sensor size for film up until digital popped into the industry. And all the rental houses have thousands and thousands of Super 35 lenses in their inventory. In the still world, it was the Wild West. There was, every manufacturer could make any sensor size they wanted. They weren't restricted to the film size or the professional film industry sensor size, but they still wanted to maintain a shallow depth of field for that creative look. So you have choices of creating lenses that have a very low F number, but if the sensor gets too small, you really have a hard time creating that depth of field. So the Panasonic introduced the 4/3 sensor size in conjunction with Olympus. So it's essentially larger than a 1 inch, so about 1 1/3 inches, but smaller than an APC, because they wanted to be able to make a camera that was small and light and versatile, that you could take on vacation. You could stick it in your pocket with a pancake lens and have something that was low power consumption, so that you could shoot all day. That's where the 4/3 sensor came out. Micro 4/3, the sensor didn't change. What changed was because there's no mirror, you're able to move the lens closer to the sensor, and by removing one of the lens elements, you were able to get closer, which meant the camera could get smaller. Up until this year, well, since 2008, 2007, I think, MFT's been around for 11 years. And this year, introducing the L mount, because the industry moved towards a full-frame capture from Sony, the Sony Venice, the Arri LF. A lot of the professional cameras all introduced the Canon C700 full-frame. All introduced full-frame cameras on the cinema side. So Panasonic came out with the L mount, but adopted the full-frame sensor, which is the same sensor that all the professional cameras are using that are offering not Super 35, 35 full-frame.
A lot of my peers have talked about the technology and the benefits of going to the different sensor sizes. I think one of the reasons why Sony moved to full frame is they saw the demand for the size and the potential for that market to grow, right? They said that originally that it couldn't be done. Then we came up with the camera called the RX1R, and the RX1, which was an extremely small size camera with a 35 millimeter lens, but full frame camera, and we saw a huge demand for that. So we saw the market. So definitely there's a benefit to customers. They perceive it's better quality when you go to a bigger sensor. You get that shallow depth of field, the dynamic range, and et cetera, et cetera. But from a business point of view, it's a huge emerging market. So that's why a lot of the innovations that you see on the Sony side have been on the full frame market, because the potential is there, so we grasped right on it. Yeah.
Other questions?
What references do you use to calibrate to different presets? So, for example, 32 is assumed you're using the 32 source reference charts you're using, etc. We get into the higher color temperatures, all the differences. Correlated color temperature, you get a color very much used in daylight. So I'm just curious, never heard that from camera manufacturers. What are you using as your references? Calibrating your presets.
We use white balance as our reference. So anytime you're trying to set a color in any environment, you would typically do a white balance. You can do auto white balance, but it's not accurate. And you also do auto black balance on the camera.
I guess what I mean, for example.
As far as preset in the camera where it says 3200.
Yeah, so obviously the light entering into the camera lens, for example. So what light references are you using, and what color references? Because all that's entering the camera. You're talking about after it's the camera, you're talking about prior setting the camera. What references are you using?
So we use the SMPTE standards, so SMPTE 709, SMPTE 2110, BT 2020. So everything's built around those the color scale that's already been created and has been out there forever. So our cameras are balanced against those color spaces. We also have a log, which is essentially just providing from, I believe it's 9 to 981 references through the SMPTE scale from 0 to 1024. So we just basically chart all of our color based on that SMPTE standard. Does that answer your question? Kind of? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that question though, it's really not maybe for us in that panel. This is more kind of our R&D team in Japan, right? In terms of the development of the products, right? Yeah, I mean, generally, you know, as you mentioned, like our cameras do record Rec 709, or they support, you know, the standards that are out there, be it HLG or any other, and beyond that, technical is part of it. That's really kind of the R&D guys who guarantee you do not speak English, right? They kind of talk to each other. If you were to ask that question, and then they'll say, "We'll get back to you." They will not provide that information.
Yes, actually, you're in a room with a lot of people that speak a different language. But I just want to ask a question, unless there's another one in the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What do you guys think about the Sigma FP?
I think it's an amazing camera, to be honest with you. And I'm from Fujifilm. I've watched all the videos on it, and I think it's quite interesting. There's quite a lot of components in that camera that I consider to be cinema, and I can be honest with you today, as great as our footage is from Fujifilm, we're still learning in the cinema world, because we've been making, you know, cine lenses for a very long time, but not cinema cameras, and cameras like that, cameras like the Blackmagic, you know, really put us, you know, in a position where we want to get better, right? And I think it's camera like Sigma and like Blackmagic that are really showing us what we have to do to be serious in cinema, right? It's not just about making the best picture, because I think from a color standpoint, I think Fujifilm, from personal opinion, and some directors as well, they really like the colors because they match that of, you know, Alexa Airy. And, you know, I think for us, it's just getting the cinema related technologies and settings and controls and compatibility into that. And to me, I think Sigma, it's, you know, it's an eye-opener for us as well at Fujifilm, and definitely when I go back to Japan, we'll go through what all the other, you know, serious cinema cameras offer, and hopefully one day, you know, we'll offer something spectacular, right? Whether it be our APS-C or it be our large format or medium format system. So, yeah, I think it's great.
I'd just like to comment on that. I think it's a really interesting camera. It's definitely taking a novel approach to sort of the full frame with, you know, sort of a push towards video recording as its specialty. And it's sort of doing that in a form factor that none of us up here, I don't think, have really attempted to go that sort of, you know, reduced to like the bar of soap size full frame. It's really interesting from sort of a stat sheet perspective. I am very eager to see how it performs in the field and what working professionals make of it. I feel like there's going to be a lot of sort of workarounds that you're going to be able to do with it. It does seem kind of modular, but what the actual shooting experience is like, I'll be eager to see people talk about that as it sort of becomes picked up by shooters.
It's the top-selling camera in Japan this week.
The FP? Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes long term. Yeah, Sigma is a company that I definitely respect. They've definitely done a great job with lensing, specifically in the past 10 years. Really sort of upping their quality, and I think they've done a great job, and maybe they can do the same in cameras, but not exactly a proven camera company yet. So I think, you know, we'll wait and see how that all shakes out in the end.
Also in Japan, though, Casio is one of the top point-and-shoot cameras back in its time too. So, and we all think about Casio as watches, right? So, or calculators. Strange market.
I've got one question, but I'll throw it out to the audience if anybody has something there. Oh.
I have one more question. Is there a difference regarding motion blur between mirror-based camera and mirrorless camera for the DOP, please?
Do you hear the question?
Yeah.
Motion blur. Is there a difference between a motion blur on a mirrorless versus a standard DSLR?
I don't think so. I think you know, you have control over shutter speeds on you know, a DSLR and a mirrorless, right? So it should be no difference at all. What you could consider is you know, you know, the wobble effect, right? I don't know if that's what you're referring to more so, or you're talking about slower shutter speeds, and if they differ between.
Viewfinder inevitably corrects motions
blur. In terms of you know, technology for mirrorless cameras have grown a long way now in terms of the refresh rate on both the LCD and the EVF. The human eye recognizes motion blur at just above 120 frames per second. And you're looking at, you know, EVFs that are already reaching that point and the resolutions from, you know, years ago to now, which is like 2.36 million dots, 3.69 million dots, 5.67 million dots, organic LEDs that have 1/5000th dynamic range. I think that has changed now with all this technology. And truthfully, you shouldn't be in fear of that motion blur. It's really non-existent anymore, to be honest with you. And I think the pleasures of working with mirrorless makes your productions probably easier, much faster, right? Aside from the benefits of also seeing your results before you even push the button to film, right? So I don't think you should be feared of motion at all. I think definitely mirrorless has stepped up in a long way from all the manufacturers. And technology in 2019 is pretty much, you know, anyone who's not a believer of mirrorless, you know, Profusion is a good show to check out and see all the brands and see all the technologies. You'd be surprised on how good technology has gotten to that point.
Thank you.
Brian Young would be proud. So.
I think the introduction of mirrorless forced the still camera manufacturers to eliminate the blur issue. I remember the first cameras that came out that were integrated lenses, and you push the shutter button and wait 1 second before it actually takes a picture. By that point, whatever you were shooting is already finished. And mirrorless in the video camera world, it's been mirrorless since day one. There has been no mirrors in the video cameras, so that technology from video ENG style cameras transported into the digital still world, and it's the same refresh rate that you would get on an ENG camera you would get on a still camera. So it should be non-existent. If it appears, then don't buy that camera.
I've got a question about autofocus. So right now I've got a mirrorless and I've got a standard DSLR, and I notice a big difference on the autofocus between the two. Maybe each of you guys could talk, because I know mirrorless has brought some real challenges when it comes to autofocus and how you approach it. Maybe each of you could quickly address that.
Maybe I'll take that one since I'm familiar with the camera you're using. I guess just from an autofocus perspective, you mean in stills or as it relates to video?
Primarily in stills, to be honest.
Yeah, well, primarily in stills, what you're going from is an autofocus module that's using mirrors and a completely separate module to on-sensor autofocus sensors. And what that does is that it eliminates the variable, the difference from the module to the actual, when you're actually taking the picture. So you're actually going to get probably more accurate focusing on the mirrorless system. The speed that the DSLRs had, the advantage is narrowing, and but the tricks that you can do on a mirrorless camera with autofocusing just because of the flexibility of the number of sensors that you have, things that you can do in terms of the flexibility of face detect and now eye detect. You can't do that on an SLR. So really where the SLR excels is probably just the blackout time, because the shutter is just one actuation, and then there's also the speed of that autofocus module. But when you go to mirrorless camera, you're eliminating now the variance, because the sensor is right on the actual chip itself. So that's probably the biggest advantage. We don't have to do things like AF fine tune anymore on the mirrorless camera, and you can more rely on the accuracy of the focus, but you can also put in other tricks there, such as face detect and eye detect, which you can't do when you're relegated to 51 points or how many points you have that are clustered in the center of the frame. That's the biggest advantage, I think.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in on?
So I think for Sony, on our mirrorless cameras, autofocus actually was one of our last greatest hurdles to make mirrorless cameras, our mirrorless cameras at least, a great competitor to DSLRs. DSLRs in the past were always much faster when it came to autofocus because of their dedicated phase array, autofocus array. But as soon as we came out with a substantial phase detection system in our cameras, that's when our mirrorless cameras really truly took off in terms of sales. So we've got autofocus improvements now up to like 693 phase detection points that cover almost the entire zone of the camera. And again, I go back to the sensors, because that's where my company really excels, is the technology and the sensors. And going back to the A9, the speed at which we can output that information really improves how fast we can autofocus, how accurate that autofocus is. And when you're talking about blackout, there's no blackout in something like that. So autofocus has been one of our most important hurdles in our development.
I think the game changer in the technology is going to be basically global shutters. And it's going to change everything from DSLRs to mirrorless, everything about that. Both from photo side and from a video standpoint. Well, basically, a global shutter is just going to be turned on, turned off instantly. And you can capture at any speeds you like. So with regards to autofocus, to shutter lag time, you know, it's going to change even the design of our cameras, because we wouldn't have to have focal plane shutters in them anymore. So they can be actually much smaller, much more durable, silent, which means that if you're shooting in a stills photographer in a set, you don't have to have a blimp. And even now, you can shoot mirrorless cameras in those settings, but they do have some sounds. And if you are shooting with the silent shutter, which is basically the electronic shutter, you know, you got banding, motion, you got fluorescent lights that affect it. So global shutter, to me, is going to be the game changer for, you know, cameras. And video is going to be a big benefit on that as well. So, you know, when it comes to autofocus, it's not a question anymore, to be honest with you, compared to DSLRs. I think in the past that was the case, definitely is. But, you know, Sony's technology, the A9, the very fast readout, and that's pretty high-speed shutter system is quite impressive. I think it is at 1/180th of a second readout. Which for motion is incredible. It's almost getting there to become global shutter. So I would say, I would say, well, you know, I get to go to Japan luckily a lot, and you know, talk with the R&D guys. They talk with the Sony guys. They talk with everyone. It's a big sharing community there. But I think if you're fearing mirrorless, I don't think that's the case anymore. I think the technology today doesn't matter what brand you buy, brings incredible technology, and the footage you get, to be honest with you, I think if anyone here is a cinematographer or a DP or just starting as a filmmaker, you can make absolutely amazing footage from all these brands that you see in front. And really, it's you know, your vision, your staff that you work with, and you know, probably the lens that you will use as well that will produce quite amazing footage. So Autofocus, to me, it's not a big deal anymore.
All right. Oh. No other.
I'm sorry, you can't bring up autofocus and expect the Canon rep to be quiet.
Well, I was kind of hoping you would speak up.
You know, I'll try and keep it brief. I'm sure everyone's heard the spiel about dual pixel autofocus before. In case you haven't, we have a proprietary technology that splits photo sites on our imaging sensor into two to take 2 separate readings per pixel. It's sort of our base technology. You kind of build all your AI off of that, your eye autofocus, your tracking, and all of that. To get back to the original question, you know, the difference between autofocus performance in a DSLR versus a mirrorless, again, it really depends on what you're talking about. You will notice probably the strongest difference in photo. But with our technology, I can say if you're using a DSLR for video and you're using like the mirrors locked up anyways, you're not really relying so much on that separate autofocus sensor as much. You are basically reading straight off the sensor just as you would with a mirrorless, so you shouldn't expect to see that much of a difference in video autofocus performance. If you're comparing apples to apples, same sensor to same processor in both.
Excellent.
Let's get that patent.
We've had it for a while.
So 15 years is almost up.
Is anyone going to catch up?
I think the problem, though, is anytime you have technology, there's always give and take, right? And when you do certain things with pixels, and we learned this from our old technology of SR when we developed Super CCD, is dynamic range, right? And there's always sort of a give and take. You can't really fool just the laws of physics, right? And so I think there's obviously a level of how good you need for what you need to get for, right? Sorry, I think I talked too much here, but technology is improving. I believe in it, and I believe in obviously laws of physics, and bigger is better sometimes, and maybe that's where our medium format comes in the future for future cinematographers.
Oh, okay. We've got one last question from Rick at the back.
I just wanted to introduce you all to a
Uh-oh. Is that me? Yeah. It's a sign.
I just wanted to introduce you all to a camera that blows all your cameras away. And it's the latest in technology. It's something that Ryerson helped co-develop, portable, digital cinema. And here it is, everybody.
Yeah.
The world's first digital cinema 4K camera. Dulce camera. If you
Very
want to see it
nice.
on your way out, I'm just going to leave it here. It's not that portable.
Okay. Well, I think the sign has come that it's time to wrap it up. Again, want to thank our presenters one more time. Feel free to go down to Profusion and see more of their goods. And again, thank you to Reed and Stosh, who's not here for helping organize.